Hey, this is Nettie with Rocket Powered Sound. In this video, I'm going to be talking about some common compression mistakes that I see people making and how to fix them. I've got 5 tips for you here in this video, so let's get right into them. Alright, so I have a little project file here that I just laid out a drop super quickly with some samples that I have. And yeah, let me play it back for you, and then I'm going to kind of demonstrate each compression mistake that I see people making in using this project file. So here we go, this is what it sounds like. So it's super simple. It's just like a little bass loop with a drum loop on it. Nothing crazy. So first thing is what I see people doing a lot is putting like OTT after like a reverb. So OTT being a multi-band compressor that kind of fits under this category, right? So let's demonstrate that on this bass. So this bass is from the bass toolkit if you're curious. But let me show you what I mean. So let me get a frequency split. This is just so that I separate the low end and the high end, so that I can like apply reverb on just the high end and not have it affect the sub. So let me get a reverb. I'll just use the stock Ableton one for this. And then this is what that sounds like. Right, so before. Just a little bit of reverb. Now, if we add OTT on this, you'll kind of immediately hear the issue. It gets super dense, right? Like, and obviously this is maybe a bit exaggerated. Like, I don't always hear it like this extreme, but like, you know, you play this in context. It can sound cool depending on like how you do it, but I think in this instance it's a bit overbearing, right? And so ultimately it is gonna, you know, come down to like the situation that you're using it in. But I think in this case it's definitely a bit too much. So how to fix it, right? Well, first thing you could do is there's a time knob here, and what you can do with the time knob is like, I don't know exactly what it does, but like it just kind of like shortens up the tail end of things, and it like makes the compression like less extreme. So like you'll have a listen. So it sounds a lot better that way. If you are looking, or if you are going to put OTT after a reverb, then definitely like adjust the time knob a bit so that, you know, it's not as extreme. Or you could turn down the dry wet, but you'll still have that like extreme tail and that like extreme ambience, right? So like if we try that, it'll still have that like density. It'll just be like a bit lower volume. So the last fix that you could do for that is you just move it before the reverb. So if you really want to OTT it, like, you know, this is the before. It sounds a lot cleaner that way. So let's move on to tip number 2. All right, so tip number 2 is take the limiter off your master. So if you use FL Studio, I think by default it places a limiter on your master. A lot of people already know about this, but if you don't know about it, that can definitely ruin your mixes very quickly. So not all limiters are bad, but I think the stock Ableton one and the stock FL one are probably not great for you to use. So let me demonstrate why. So, you know, let me just remind you what it sounds like without a limiter. Right. As soon as you add a limiter, I mean, the effect now is going to be a bit subtle, but you'll kind of hear a difference. So it doesn't sound like terrible, right? But like if we exaggerate the effect, you'll kind of start to notice like the problems with it. So what I'm going to do is like I'm going to turn the ceiling down, which kind of acts as if you raise the volume. I mean, you could also raise the volume a bit, like. You can kind of hear how like in the gaps where like the sub isn't playing, or like something kind of dips down in volume, like suddenly the sustain bass gets just really loud, right? Like you kind of hear the little beep thing. Like it just gets like really loud, you know, whenever the other things aren't playing. And so that's kind of happening on a smaller scale if you like aren't really being careful. You can end up running into that problem where you are like weirdly ducking things because the limiter is like, you know, like doing its job a little too well, right? Like it's not letting anything through. And so how to fix this? Well, just don't use a limiter. Like anytime I produce, my default Ableton project just has a saturator on it with the soft clip mode on. and then a digital clip. That's it. So what that does is like it makes it so that it doesn't go in the red. So if you look here, right, it never goes into the red with the soft clipper like before it does. You put it on, and, it fixes everything. The way it does that is it basically just like it acts the same way as if you were to like consolidate something or like record something to audio. Like instead of it like going through like if you were to turn up like this bass sample, and like you'll notice how the peaks kind of just start going through the top of the screen. Basically, it'll basically just act as if like that top of the screen, like if that part that's over the screen like doesn't exist. So it'll just like cut it off and then be like, all right, like it's just like clipped here, and then like it'll look more like this. So yeah, soft clipper on the master, definitely recommend it instead of a limiter. So let's move on to the next tip. All right, so this next one is too much release on your sidechain. So sidechain compression is of course like the trick where you take a compressor, you put it on like your bass group or whatever else, and you use it to like duck down the volume of it so that your drums stand out a bit. Now one mistake I see a lot like is that like people will have the release set too high, so meaning the sidechain is too long. So this is what mine sounds like. Listen for the sidechain. You'll notice it's like not really noticeable. Like you can kind of make it out, but I think it's like more or less pretty subtle. Let's start like exaggerating this effect. And by the way I have this set up, just for anyone who's curious, I have a drum rack here called labeled the sidechain thing, and I have like MIDI triggers, and they trigger these like white noise pieces. They're very loud, and they go through the compressor on my drop group, and then I have like two of them, one to duck down that transient all the way. You'll see that for this one. It's like a really short one, and then one to get the bulk of the sidechain going on. And yeah, these are like routed from the sidechain, as you can see. So that's both of them, like that. So too much sidechain release sounds like this. Bit exaggerated. I don't think most people would do it that extreme, but even like something like this is like totally eating up the tear out gun that we have, like the initial like kick and snare one. It's like completely eating it, right? And so like like you can get away with a pretty short sidechain. Like I could probably get away with like maybe 35. Especially in like more like clipped and like distorted genres, you can get away with like some pretty gnarly like short sidechain, because like it doesn't really matter. If you want to be like very careful about like clipping and stuff like that, then you gotta like look into, I don't know, that's a bit out of my ballpark. I don't really like go into that because I don't really mix that cleanly. I do it this way on purpose, but yeah, essentially, like having, I would say like 50 milliseconds, 60 milliseconds is probably like the most you'd ever want, really, unless you're doing like a specific, like maybe like a flume genre or something where you have like the super strong sidechain. That can be a cool effect, but I think especially if you have more dense drums, as in like drums that are happening kind of frequently, like a more complex drum pattern or something like that, you really want to make sure your sidechain is like as short as it as short as it can be, so where it's not like super noticeable. Because this is not quite it, in my opinion. So yeah, too long of a sidechain. Let's move on to the next tip. Okay, so the next tip is not enough OTT. So if you're making like dubstep or color bass or any kind of like heavier genre of music, this is going to be a very important thing to like learn. You don't have to use OTT specifically, but I think OTT is like a really solid like way to beef up your sounds. So let's use this tear out example, right? We have this tear out song, and we obviously want it to hit as hard as possible. Now, in the beginning of this video, we added the like OTT and reverb, but without it, it sounds kind of dull. This just goes way harder. And so sometimes if you have like not enough OTT, it can kind of fall a bit flat, or like it's more like that you use the OTT to kind of like glue everything together and like kind of put something at the forefront. That's kind of what I tend to use it for, and like to get the like volume level like nice and loud of like whatever I'm putting the OTT on. So Not having enough OTT, I mean, I don't really have many samples where like the there's not enough OTT on it already, like out the gate, that I could like show it off of, especially not the rock powered sound. Having like not enough OTT or just like lacking that, you know, like that like punch is like something that I definitely see a lot. And it's so simple because all you have to like, especially for this, the reason like having a lot of OTT works is because you're like, and like clipping it especially works, is because when you clip like the sub, like low end and like the mids and high end together, it'll kind of start sounding like one sound instead of like two separate things, right? So if I were to like EQ this out, EQ out the sub, and then like add my own sub in, you'll notice it'll sound kind of weird. So let me do that real quick. We're in C sharp, I think. Like that. Now there's a bit of a weak sub right now, so let's kind of add some harmonics. It'll kind of fall flat until you clip it. Like, so like right now we have our sub sitting at like a okay volume. You can hear it very clearly, right? Or at least when the, you know, the pitch bend starts. If you maybe if you're listening on a phone, you're not really gonna hear it. But as soon as you start cranking it a bit, it starts to sound like one sound. And so, you know, this is what OTT is good for, is you just like, you know, put an OTT on it. And suddenly it sounds like one sound. So yeah, very roundabout way to say that OTT helps glue sounds together, and if you don't really use it to your advantage, you can kind of risk like your songs falling flat. So let's move on to the next tip. All right, so the last tip is using too much OTT, right? There is also such a thing as too much that can definitely ruin your mix as well, right? There's a balance between everything. So let's just like put a OTT on like the drop group and just see what it sounds like, right? That is a bit much, right? So you don't want that. I don't think many people are going to be putting OTTs on their entire group, especially not like leaving it untouched like this. But I have definitely heard a lot of mixes in my you know, producer days where like it'll genuinely sound like people put like an OTT on like the master and like just don't touch it. And like you don't want to be that person, because like it's definitely gonna like cause your mixes to just like lose dynamics, like not really feel like very, I don't know, like put together well. Now it can be a cool effect as well to have like a really bad mixdown like on purpose. Like for example, one rack that I use a lot is the terrible mixdown master rack, which is, I mean, if you just take a look, I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. You know, we have like a bunch of compressors, a bunch of multiband compression as well, and then like a little EQ curve at the end. It makes it sound bad, but it's like depending on if you write your music around it, then it can sound kind of good. So like one thing I do is like I need to update this rack, to be honest, but I just like delete 3 of the compressors. In this instance, it doesn't really work that well because it's like kind of a stompy song. But like, it can kind of work. Like it does go hard this way, right? That's the thing about like OTT and just like compression in general, is it will make your song go harder. It's just that like you kind of have to control like where you place it and like how much you do it, like how, like in what capacity you do it, and you have to understand why you're doing it as well. Because if you're just kind of like using it as like a fix for your mixdown to like make the mixdown like terrible, right? Like you know, there needs to be a better term for that, because it's like using a compressed mixdown basically. It shouldn't ever really be a fix. It should be like a creative choice. So if your mixdown is falling flat, like the solution wouldn't be probably wouldn't be to like add a terrible mixdown master rack type thing, but you know, maybe for your own, like in your own way. That probably isn't the move that you want to make. In that instance, it would probably be to like address the issue like within the mixdown itself. Like don't put like something on the master, right? Like if it's not hitting hard enough, maybe you don't have enough OTT, or you know, you have too much OTT, or it's like everything is squashed so that nothing has impact anymore. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. So like master rack would never be, you know, a solution to that. But yeah, too much OTT is certainly like an issue that I see a lot, and yeah, you definitely avoid it, because dynamics are very important. Like especially like if you think about like I'll demonstrate this last thing real quick with like OTT. So the thing about doing it this way, right? Is you don't get gaps in how loud everything is. Like it's like constantly like almost like pretty much the exact same loudness, and as a result you don't like really hear that contrast between nothing and everything. Like so if I play like silence, like and then play the tear out gun, it's gonna sound like so impactful, because it's like you just heard silence. Like you now contextually understand what silence sounds like within this context of the song. So if you just totally remove all that by, you know, compressing it like crazy, then yeah, that's not gonna sound great. But you know, let's turn up the time, right? Like right now we've got these little gaps, right? Like I purposely left a little gap right here so that like as soon as this hits, it hits harder than if we were to just kind of continue the sustain bass, because I could do that too. Let's try that. Right, maybe let me just like remove the OTT from this. Like now it doesn't really pause, and so you know, like let's take the old chopped up sustain bass. It just pauses a little bit. That's essentially like why like adding an OTT and like bringing all the volume up to be like the exact same volume like the whole way through. It removes punch instead of adds it. So anyway, that was a very long little tangent about that. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Be sure to leave a comment, leave a like, all that stuff, and I'll hopefully see you guys in another video. Goodbye.